your professional background, an overview of that, and, where you've come over the years in perhaps a few minutes.
Sure, yeah. I'll try not to delve too deeply back, but I have had kind of like a bit of a varied background, I suppose, at least as far as it relates to kind of like design and development. So I guess I'll start back in undergrad. I originally wanted to be a psychologist and had been focused on that since I was like a small child, and then got to undergrad and realized that I was much more interested in culture and social systems as opposed to kind of like the very behavioral kind of concept or approach to psychology that was kind of taught at Berkeley, where I started my undergrad. And so I kind of switched over and kind of explored different ways, like different approaches to like cultural anthropology and sociology, and ended up being really interested in Eastern Europe and the Balkans. And so my degree was in European studies, but with a strong focus on kind of cultural systems, and kind of like comparative anthropology. And I wasn't quite clear that development would be something I was interested in, although I was like very active around kind of human rights and issues that are kind of closely related to development, but then took a kind of a tangent and taught English in Japan for a year to do something just like very, very different, and came back and thought that I would pursue kind of the international relations track, kind of use that side of my educational background, and so wanted to do something more kind of applied and hands-on, but for just personal reasons wasn't able to move out of the country again. So did kind of like a Los Angeles-based like policy think tank role for a little while. I was a glorified like personal assistant, but it still gave me a sense of like, I do want to do international relations stuff, but I'm very frustrated at being being on the track to be like an armchair expert. So while I was there, I had a chance to do some projects around women's rights and women's empowerment, especially in Latin America. And so that really convinced me that I wanted to get a master's degree to like continue my studies in international development so that I could do something more applied. And still I didn't really have language for it, but I was interested in doing something that kind of bridged what I understood to be anthropology, participatory development, and that would eventually kind of lead me toward design, although I wasn't aware of it at the time.
Yeah.
So I went and did my master's at Columbia SIPA, School of International and Public Affairs, Uptown, 2010 to 2012, that's that. I don't really know what else to say about that, but I guess where it's relevant is I kind of came out of that really still wanting to figure out a way to execute the vision of development that I had kind of come in with. I found that I had learned a lot of terms, a lot of like historical concepts, but especially given the program that SIPA had, which I think is a bit behind the times, it really, I came out and was like, there's nowhere that I want to work. I don't want to work in the UN. I don't want to work for USAID. I can't just go and embed in a tiny NGO abroad, nor do I really want to focus that much. I want to be doing good, ethical, like impactful work that actually involves people, where I build relationships with the people who I'm trying to support or facilitate development for. What do I do? And I happened to come across Reboot, which was where Lauren worked as well, and just the way that Reboot talked about design in the context of development really spoke to me. And so I miraculously, given my level of experience, was hired to be their first research manager in 2013.
Congratulations.
It's
a testament to, what you bring to them as well. Yeah.
Like, apparently, yeah. I mean, they were, I think, how many years old at that point? They were a year or two in the, like, actual, like, full-fledged organizational stage at that time. And I don't know if it's helpful to give kind of a background on Reboot.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So Reboot was founded by kind of a husband and wife team, one of whom was an ethnographer, design ethnographer who was trained, started at UNICEF Innovation, was then trained by Jan Chipchase, and then had started up her own shop with her then husband, or soon to be husband, I guess. I don't know what the correct terminology is, but they got married over the course of this whole project. And so they had started this small consulting firm with the idea of entryism, that they were going to kind of see the design approach and an idea of like what human-centered development could be by in the development space by working through like your World Banks and USAIDs and all of the kind of the big guns. And so I was very inspired by that and was like, what's this design stuff? This looks great. Cool. Teach me. So that's kind of where my whole concept of design for development has really come from. So because I think it was a pretty scrappy startup where things worked very fast, and Panthea has both like an incredible level of like rigor to her thought and thinking, and also just moves very fast. Like I really had to just immediately dive in and start learning by doing without like a whole lot of like guidance into what this whole field was. So I feel like my design education has very much been like DIY. So that's been interesting. My design education and kind of like my own sense of myself as a researcher, design researcher, development practitioner, changed pretty greatly over this time.
Sorry to interrupt. Sorry.
No,
but do you look at other people around you and think that their design experience is not DIY?
No, I mean, so it depends on what specific question like we're asking. So, you know, and I don't know if it just comes down to visuals, but it means that like most of my experiences weren't coming out of, they didn't come with like a conceptual like contextualization or a set of these are the principles or these are the tools, or, you know, everything was kind of agglutinative, and so then I kind of sussed it out like as different pieces emerged to me. So if I'm thinking about like my experience versus someone who's coming from like School of Visual Arts who did their like social innovation program or something like that, mine was much more, I always forget what's inductive versus deductive, but mine's the opposite, whichever theirs is.
Right. Theirs is abductive, I think. No, but yeah.
Right.
Okay. So
yeah.
I think
there's more like top down, bottom up, or however you want to put it together. But yeah, I mean, I think it comes out when I'm trying to think about how to apply what I've seen more broadly. My experience is like basically based on like a lot of case studies. So I've kind of developed in tools and frameworks like in response to different kind of cases. And thankfully at Reboot I had enough of a project breadth to kind of test out like a pretty consistent set of tools and approaches, which was really helpful. But yeah, I mean, I think my experience has been pretty broad and diverse rather than necessarily super deep in one and focused.
no, I can relate to that. I think that's I rarely find people who have been like intentionally trained in design knew that this is, or you know, the kind of design that we're talking about. Or that even people who've come from industrial design backgrounds who are now working in this space, like they've also gone through very similar transitions. You know? So it's true. It's interesting, like all the different places we can all come from and then end up working in this space. And I think we're all sort of learning as we go through the case studies being thrown in, but maybe,
Yeah. No, I mean, it has been really interesting, like at different times when I've had to kind of ask myself, like, what is this design thing? Like if I'm taking on the mantle of designer here, and for a long time I really didn't. It wasn't until I went through a couple like experiences at Reboot that I felt kind of like formed kind of personal capstones where I was like, I think I've passed a milestone there. Like I don't feel like a total fraud putting like designer on a CV at this point. But I feel like it's very contextual, and I'm still much more comfortable with like researcher or like ethnographic researcher, depending on kind of the context.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So when you were sort of asking this really interesting question, like what is design?
Right,
but like what is it to you? Like when you think of, like, pick a term, design thinking, human-centered design, pick a term that means the most to you, and what does that mean?
Yeah. And I don't like if we're being specific about like human